Hey everybody, welcome to the Script and Style Show, the web show where we talk about web development and the people that make it happen. I'm Todd Gardner from Track.js JavaScript Error Monitoring, and my co-host David Walsh, creator of the popular blog davidwalsh.name. How's it going today, David?
I'm good. How are you?
I could be better. I have a house full of bees right now. So yeah, that's super fun. We have a yellow jacket nest in one of our walls that we sprayed yesterday. And yeah, now they all don't want to go out their main entrance and they're finding their way into the house, which is not so good. We're sucking up about a bee a minute with a vacuum cleaner.
What?
Yeah.
Okay. For step one, find a real estate agent.
It happens. It happens.
Gotta get out of there. So like, are you gonna get stung during this? Are you?
No. It's in the other side of the house. Our dog got stung last night, like in the middle of the night, got stung, and so she was not happy. She's on some Benadryl right now and kind of high, but she's feeling much
really happy. So, when did you discover this?
Well, we've had bees, like this outside nest that's like in an exterior wall, and they just had an entrance point in for like a couple of weeks. And I'd called in our exterminator, and he came in and he sprayed the nest twice, on two subsequent days. But today is when they start like coming in. So I'm assuming that something like that. There's so many dead bees, so many dead yellow jackets in this hive that they can't get out the front door anymore, or not as many can get out the front door. And so they're finding their way in the house instead, which is not ideal.
Sell the house.
Just sell it and move. Burn it down and leave.
Go.
But enough about that. There will not be any yellow jackets during the broadcast today. I am sealed off in a separate room. So A+ on that. But we have a guest today.
That we do. We have my former MDN colleague, former MDN manager, the poor guy.
Your boss.
He was my boss at one point.
Ooh. That's a strong word.
He got out of jail. But yeah, he's coming from Mozilla, and he's going to talk to us about a whole bunch of stuff today. It's Luke Crouch. Welcome, Luke.
Hello.
Thanks for joining us, Luke. So you work on the Firefox privacy and security team, yes?
Yes.
Well, awesome. We're going to talk about all that stuff today. But before we really get into that, we like to know where people came from and tell some stories about how did people get into this software development, industry that we're all in. And people come from all kinds of weird and different backgrounds. So what's your origin story? How did you find your way into this world?
Oh, like a lot of people our age and demographic, I picked up some early web development books, or kind of early high school, middle school time period. Got on the internet, threw some HTML pages up about, my brother and I playing outside, like, whoa, look, I can make tables and images and look at this thing called the web, and it shows up in a browser, and that's cool. So then through high school and college, I was doing kind of like freelance web development mostly, and consulting web development, stuff like that. And then like almost everyone in Tulsa, Oklahoma, I went to work at an oil company in an IT department. That's just par for the course here.
That's just what happens in Oklahoma.
What you do, man. So yeah, worked for an oil company and doing some kind of internal web app stuff, and learned a lot there, and created a open source database monitoring tool called Ajax My Top, which got some kind of play from one of the big MySQL authors at the time. Got popular, published it on SourceForge, and through that actually got a job at SourceForge itself. So worked at SourceForge for about 4.5 years.
Wasn't remotely. SourceForge the same group that owned like Slashdot and all of that back in the day?
Yeah, so we had offsites at the Slashdot headquarters up in Michigan a couple times. We also owned ThinkGeek, so we got like a bunch of free ThinkGeek swag.
Nice.
Time and ThinkGeek.
Owned? Is it still all owned by that conglomerate, or?
I don't remember. There's been a couple of changes since then. It was GeekNet. It was OSTG. Then it was GeekNet. Then it was something else. I think SourceForge is off with Dice or somebody right now. But yeah, so that was a cool outfit to hang out with. And from there, I'd say almost 8 years ago, applied at Mozilla and started working at Mozilla doing Python and Django on the wiki backend of MDN. Well, that's where I met David. And then around about 2 years ago, started doing the privacy and security work, joining the privacy security engineering team here at Firefox. So that's pretty much it. That's the summary.
So we're going to talk about privacy and security in a minute, but we have to talk a little bit of MDN. We have to recover some of our good old days. So before I joined MDN right when I started at Mozilla. And when I joined, MDN was sort of a CMS, like a third-party CMS, I should say. And could you tell a little bit of the story of how we implemented the new backend for MDN?
Yeah, so
it was based on a current the Docs project, wasn't it?
Yeah, so it was originally MindTouch, which was, especially in our case, sort of an unholy offspring of .NET and Mono and PHP all running on these servers that were prone to catch fire and were not easy to back up. So there was like this constant fear that MDN would go away and would never come back if somebody typed the wrong semicolon in the wrong console somewhere. So we needed to kind of move it off of this very shaky, half proprietary, half open thing. And what we did was we took the code base of the support.mozilla.org site, so Sumo. They had recently done their own wiki software in Python and Django called Kitsune. And we basically wanted to do another Python and Django wiki, which means that we took the Kitsune code base and we forked it into a new repo called Kuma. And Kuma became the new wiki backend. But that was like step one of about a 200-step process of getting everything moved over. So now that we actually had a Python-powered wiki, we had to take all of the content that was in MindTouch format, but had also previously been migrated from MediaWiki format, and get it into this new format called whatever we were going to call it, Kuma. And that meant that we also had to migrate, I think about, you probably remember, what was there, like 10 to 15,000 templates, like CumaScript templates?
Right, yep.
So one of the engineers created an entire, basically a static site generator before we used to call them static site generators, called CumaScript, which would take a bunch of EJS templates, and it made a bunch of API calls back to MDN itself, and then rendered dynamic content inside of the pages. So it ended up becoming this sort of at least two-headed hydra of Python and Django, and then also Node.js running these EJS templates called CumaScript, and a bunch of HTTP API calls back and forth in between them. Yeah, it was a monster of a project. And I think it took us like, what, a year and a half or 2 years total?
Right. Yeah, but the awesome thing was that the launch was like smooth. Like we were all sitting there waiting for the 2 a.m. phone call that everything had broken. But yeah, everything was awesome.
Yeah, we geared up an entire day. And I remember Ali jumped on the call, and we had ops, and we had QA, and we had writing, and we had engineering, we had everyone on this call, and we were like, push the button, and we were just waiting for the fire to start. And I think after 10 minutes, Ali was like, well, I'm just going to go, guys, because this is really boring. The only thing that was like, Twitter was just like exploding with like, whoa, MDN looks super awesome now. Like, that was it. That was all that happened. They went and had nice, expensive beers at Beer Bistro in Toronto afterwards to celebrate. So.
Oh, I have some stories from that trip. But I just wanted to bring that up because MDN is something that everybody uses every day. And sort of the background story of going from a third-party thing over to a custom-written thing and everything going well is almost the unicorn of all projects. So I just wanted people to get that background.
Yeah.
But about 3 years after I had started, both you and I had sort of gone our separate ways in that I went on to do some evangelism stuff, but you took a different path. So like, what was your transition from MDN to your then new team?
Yeah, I got, so kind of around 4 or 5 years of working on MDN. Basically, my manager suggested like, hey, you might check out a couple other projects around Mozilla, because if you always work on the same project for so long, it's too easy to get kind of locked into being, that project developer, and you lose some of your other, you might be ignoring some other skills that you could get on other projects. So for about a year, I went between a few different teams. So I helped out with the push service, MDN, or not MDN, man, got me talking on MDN now. So Firefox has push notifications, like all the major browsers, and that requires a very massive service on the back end that has to have persistent connections open to Firefox in order to deliver the push payloads and all that kind of stuff. And so they needed a developer console, so that if you run a website or have a web application that is sending these things, you need to be able to sign into a developer console where you could see how many of your push notifications were actually getting delivered and stuff like that. So I built that up for that team over about 3 to 6 months, and then worked on a couple other odds and ends here and there. But then the service that I really got into that hooked me on the privacy and security stuff was a service called Shavar here at Mozilla that serves about 10,000 requests a second. And it's essentially serving responses to Firefox whenever Firefox phones in and asks if there's any list updates for the tracking protection block list. So if you don't know, then Firefox has tracking protection built into it, and it uses these block lists. And so we have scripts that transform block lists from our upstream provider, who is Disconnect, into the Google Safe Browsing format, which is what we deliver down to Firefox. And every 30 minutes or so, I think, Firefox client will send a ping to the service saying what version of the list it has, and then ask if it needs to download a new update. So I took over that service, and from there got super interested in all of the privacy and security projects that we have going on. So as soon as I started working on that, I basically told my manager, like, hey, I want to join that team full time. Like, I want to do privacy and security full time. That's it. And so over the next like 6 to 8 months, basically worked with him to find a way to do that.
So what type of trackers were you blocking? What are some of the examples?
The easy ones are the Googles and the Facebooks and the Twitters. I mean, anytime you're browsing online, or web developers have added these buttons. So you can add a tweet button or a like button in a way that's just static HTML type code, and it's just a button that you click on and opens a new window. That wouldn't trigger any of the tracking protection. It's whenever you use like the dynamic JavaScript that sends a request over to Facebook to kind of like, hey, I want to draw a smart like button that shows, hey, here's your other friends on Facebook who like this page, and that kind of stuff. It means that what it has to do is it's sending Facebook the page that you're looking at and who you are, right? So it's got cookies, it's got all that other stuff sent in those requests. And so those are the tracking requests that tracking protection will block. That's just kind of the easy ones that everyone knows about, sees as the high-profile visible ones. But there's a whole bunch of basically data brokers, kind of data intermediaries that also, anytime an ad is displayed, there's typically like a real-time auction that occurs. And that real-time auction to occur, it can sometimes go through like 17 or 18 requests and redirects to kind of like pass on, here's an ad space, right, that is being shown right now to a user. And here's a bunch of the cookies that we know about this user. So we know that they're, they've been to these other sites, so that we know that they're into web development, for example, right? So who wants to show this ad? And they have to kind of throw that out there to a bunch of different intermediaries in order to display an ad. Well, that means that all of those intermediaries can now see all of the pages that you're looking at online. So a lot of those are also included in the block lists.
Okay, when you started on this privacy stuff, I noticed you quickly decline your social media usage, and I feel like what you've told us right there is really scary. You sort of assume that Facebook had that information, but you don't think that about what you call the real-time auction of all these other places getting it as well.
Yeah, and it's an interesting space, and the awareness has really started to come up in the last couple of years. I think from a user perspective, what people started to notice more strongly, just I didn't, and it took looking at the user research to sort of see that this was still an issue, because I had used tracking protection or ad blockers before, but what was happening is that people were seeing the same ads following them online all the time. And it was like, how is this happening? How is the same ad, following me on Amazon and in my Facebook feed and everywhere else that I browse online? And I think that's when people first started to understand something is watching me, right? And so definitely something has been watching you. And now if you see the same thing on Facebook over and over and over again, that's not as jarring of an experience, right? Because I'm on Facebook, I feel like I'm on their platform. Surely they can, it's like being in a store. They can see what you're doing in that store, and you don't feel weirded out by that, right? It's if someone can see what you're doing in every store, that starts to feel scary, right?
The first time I ever kind of realized it was we were planning or starting to think about taking our kids to Disney World. And so had never seen an ad for Disney ever. Went to Disney's website, did a little bit of research, and suddenly the entire web was full of Disney ads.
Yep.
Everywhere.
Disney web.
It was everywhere. Like Google was full of Disney ads, YouTube was full of Disney ads, Facebook was full of Disney ads. And I was like, oh, how are they doing this? And then I, find out about remarketing or retargeting and how all these things follow. And it's terrifying. I mean, it must work for all these companies to do it. But it's a little freaky. It's like, Mickey, stay the fuck away from me.
Yeah, and we have. I mean, there's a lot of academic research that kind of exposes some of the more aggressive, what they would call like aggressive tracking versus sort of what you expect. And one of the research papers, I think, it was either titled or like lovingly subtitled, like, if you're going to track me, at least please use cookies and not all of this other weird stuff. Because it was like the trackers have gone beyond cookies, right, to fingerprinting and all these other things that can happen online. And so it was like, okay, if you're going to track me, please just use a cookie, because at least I understand what's going on.
Yeah,
I understand there's a cookie involved. So
now you work on this full time.
Yes.
So tell me, what does the Firefox privacy and security group do?
So security kind of touches a lot of Firefox engineering. So some of it is some of the security stuff is actually done by other specific teams. So if there's like security properties of, say, WebRTC or something, then security team may provide a review or may do patch review and say, oh, you should do this. But then it's mostly on that team to sort of implement the security or to secure their code or whatever. But the team that I immediately work on, we have built things like the Firefox containers, and Tanvi Vyas, who is the privacy tech lead, she created the origin attributes architecture that kind of makes containers possible. So she did a lot of the sort of like platform level all across Firefox. Here's a new thing in the world called origin attributes. And it's what lets us sort of isolate certain tabs belong to certain containers. And it keeps the like cookies and things separated between these containers, right? So she does that, which means that then other Firefox engineers can build more things on top of that, like the containers that we built and the Facebook container and stuff like that. So that came out of our team for sure. And then we have a crypto engineering team that works on NSS, which is the Netscape security suite, and is kind of the lower level networking and crypto libraries that are used by basically all the rest of Firefox and some outside projects. And then there is a content security sort of team, and what they do is they implement things like content security policy into the browser itself. So given a certain content security policy, how do we actually like make the assurances inside of Firefox that this page that is loading will only load sub-resources from the things that are in the CSP directive kind of thing.
That's awesome. We had Scott Helm from Report URI on the show a couple weeks ago to talk about CSP. That was a really good show. So your team works on the implementation of that, but like how do you actually figure out what to do once you've received a content security policy from the page?
Yep. And so there's a part of the team, I'd say the second team that I'm on, there's maybe about 20 to 25 people. And so those are the major areas, but we also have a couple of people that focus on Tor support. So since Tor is mostly Firefox, one thing that we can do to make it easier is to kind of uplift Tor patches into the Firefox code base itself so that they don't have to keep maintaining patches. They can just turn on about config prefs inside the Tor project. So there's a couple of people that have focused on that. Kind of touches a lot of stuff. And we do like privacy and security reviews for some of the test pilot experiments that may go out or the shield studies that may go out and things like that.
Okay, so for those who aren't familiar with it because they use a competitor, what are containers in Firefox? And why are there different types of containers? What does that represent?
So the containers in Firefox, if you get the add-on that's called multi-account containers, it will create, by default, a personal container, a work container, a shopping container, and I think a travel container or a banking container, one of those. But what it lets me do is I can have a personal tab open to mail.google.com, and that would be my personal email. And then I can open a work tab to mail.google.com, and that would be my work email. So it lets you, the reason it's called multi-account is because it lets you sign into multiple accounts in the same browser window, same browser session. Each tab has its own container of cookies so that the cookies that are signed in with your personal container are different than the ones that are signed in from your work container. So you can, if you've got 6 social media profiles, you could have 6 containers, one for each of them, and you could be signed into whatever social site on all of those.
Okay, so it doesn't work like a private tab, for example.
Right.
It just lets you compartmentalize
exactly
tabs into almost. Okay, cool.
And it does. We have people that were basically using private browsing for this purpose to I want to sign into a second account, and so now I have 2. I have my regular browsing accounts that I'm signed into, and my private browsing window is this other one. Well, this basically just creates however many numbers of those that you want.
I totally did that. I had, both Chrome and Firefox regular and private windows open so I could have 4 different things going. I've done that before. Yeah. And the container tabs, when that launched, with Firefox Quantum, 6 months ago, something like that?
Yeah, I think we had, that sounds right.
that was amazing. I use that is as big of a revolutionary step, in my opinion, as tabs were.
We have, I remember a web developer caught me at one of our events because they have a bunch of clients, and all of their clients that they do their websites for, they basically created a container for each of their clients so that they could have tabs open to either WordPress.com or wherever they might be hosting that client's websites. And each container could basically be another client. So they could open up a bunch of different tabs, and all of their clients, online sites and online accounts, were all in this one container.
So what is the need for different types of containers if they're roughly just a separate session tab?
The ones that I have a GitHub container, for example, and so that's where I have my account that's signed into GitHub. And then if I want to go to Travis CI or something, I open that up in my GitHub container, because if I'm going to sign in with GitHub, it's there. Now, it's also if you have a Facebook container, which is another extension that I help to work on. But let's say you have a container that's just for Facebook. It means that you can sign into Facebook there. And if you start to go browse the rest of the web outside of your Facebook container, then the requests that are made to Facebook, like those tracking requests, they don't contain your Facebook cookie from your Facebook container. So the reason this is a privacy and security feature is on the privacy side, you have the Facebook example. So the Facebook like buttons are now not associated with the cookie that you're signed in your Facebook container. They have their own cookies. And when you're outside of that container, they have different cookies. On the security side, let's take the banking container for an example. If you're signed in to your online banking dashboard inside of your banking container, and someone tries to send like a CSRF attack inside of a regular tab, your regular tab is not signed into your online bank. So even if your online bank portal has a CSRF or a cross-site scripting vulnerability, it only ever happens in your banking container. So as you're browsing elsewhere on the web, attacks that try to exploit that can't reach across the container to the banking container to actually do that. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So out of curiosity, have we received any blowback from people who are not happy that we've done this? Like, is this something where Facebook would be upset about this or not really?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, so the Facebook container itself was a very specific purpose use of containers.
Right.
What's unique about the Facebook container project versus just making a container using regular container tabs called Facebook that Facebook.com goes to?
So one thing in the multi-account containers, if you made a Facebook container, you can assign Facebook to open into it. But as soon as you're inside that Facebook container, if you start clicking links in Facebook that take you off of Facebook, by default, links open in the same container. So anywhere you go from Facebook is still inside that one. But if you go download the Facebook container extension, its sole purpose is it comes hard-coded, assigns Facebook.com to this container, and any other website you go to, it takes you out of it.
Okay, so that's really cool.
Are somewhere else and you click a link to Facebook, it puts you in the Facebook container just for the time you're on Facebook. And if you click a link that takes you out, it takes you out of the Facebook container.
Nice.
So basically, keeps Facebook inside of its own container.
So I would imagine Facebook is kind of ticked off about that.
Yeah, I haven't heard from any of them since we launched it. But
let's not get anybody in trouble. So the containers were part of what we call test pilot, right? So yes. What are for the people who aren't familiar with test pilot, what else has come out of test pilot, right?
Yeah. So my first exposure with test pilot was an experiment with tracking protection. So we've had tracking protection for a long time, and there's always been a concern that it breaks websites. So we wanted to run basically an experiment where we turned on some tracking protection and allowed users to report when things are broken or not. So we spun up an experiment on test pilot called tracking protection. And over the course of a week or two, we got about 100,000 people who went to testpilot.firefox.com, they installed the add-on, and then as they were browsing, if they thought web pages were broken, they could click a button and tell us that this page is broken because of tracking protection. What that gave us was a bunch of data now about, we had a Bugzilla tree and a bunch of Bugzilla bugs filed about things that might be broken with tracking protection. But if you've ever used Bugzilla, which I'm sure David can sympathize, there's a small slice of the overall web user who's willing to go through Bugzilla to talk about broken websites. And that's not a very representative sample. So this made it easier for people to send that data to us, and it meant that we could go and prioritize which of the trackers or which of the websites seem to be the most commonly broken by it. So we get this data. We were able to go to our upstream provider and sort of make some upstream list changes based on this data. So that was pretty cool. But test pilot itself, and we ran containers through this, it's essentially just a vehicle for us to try out features that may graduate straight into Firefox. They may be part of Firefox and we just want to study some changes on them, or they may just turn into something else. So it's really just a vehicle for us to try things out before we put it onto millions and millions of Firefox users.
Cool. And you said those are all done through extensions.
So yeah, there's the ones that I have done have all been what they call now Firefox experiments. So they are typically delivered as add-ons, as extensions. But they have had a couple that have been like web experiments. And one of my favorites is actually send.firefox.com. Send is a very cool one-time file share experiment. So if you go to send.firefox.com, you upload a file, and it encrypts it, and it takes the key that you need to decrypt it and sticks it in a URL, and you share that URL with someone. And right after they download it, the file disappears from the internet. So it's like a kind of a privacy-conscious way to quickly and easily share files. So that one's just a website that doesn't really have an add-on at all. It can be used by anyone. But yeah, for the most part, they're add-ons, extensions.
Awesome. So one of the things that I've been hearing about but don't know a lot about is Firefox Monitor. Could you explain what that is to everybody?
Yeah, so Firefox Monitor is a collaboration that we're doing with Troy Hunt, who runs the Have I Been Pwned website. And so if you don't know what Have I Been Pwned is, you can go to Have I Been Pwned and you can punch in your email address. And Troy has data sets for hundreds of breaches. So if your email address has been involved in one of these data breaches, then you can find out about it. So you can find out if your email address was involved in the LinkedIn or Adobe or Dropbox or any of the sort of big major breaches that have happened out there. He has the breach data, and he can help you sort of look up for yourself if you've been involved. And if you've been involved, then you can change your passwords. Well, if you've ever taken someone who's not particularly tech savvy already and told them to go to a site called Have I Been Pwned and punch in their email address, that's
yeah.
The reactions. Let's say there's a spectrum of reactions. So we wanted to make this sort of very valuable service and valuable experience and valuable knowledge available to more people, especially to Firefox users. So we are building an integration with Troy where we can look up in sort of in a privacy-preserving way to find out if you put your email address into Firefox Monitor, we can hash it and send a partial hash to him. So Troy doesn't know exactly which email address is being asked for, but he can send us a bucket of responses, and we can show you your specific results. So we can do that on our page, and it sort of lets you sort of shift trust to Mozilla, if you will. And then the client-side Firefox integration of it is that we can actually, depending on some heuristics, as soon as you go to a site that has been involved in a breach, we can show kind of a warning message door hanger that says something like, hey, you should know this site was involved in a data breach, and click here to learn more, and click here and we have some of the same info about the breach. And then if you want to scan your email address for other breaches, you can do that too. So I think the last product, that's like basically what I took a break from to do this, is working on the Firefox Monitor project. So I'm deep in the middle of that, doing a lot of the hash and email type functionality for the backend.
That's really cool. Where's the concern about passing your email address to Troy? Why does that exist?
Yeah, like I said, it's mostly from me trying. So I do digital privacy and security workshops at our local library, and that doing things at a place like a library, it kind of exposes you to people of a much different tech savvy background. So it's kind of a user research vehicle for me to go tell people like, hey, I do this talk about passwords in 2FA. And then at the end of the talk, I say, hey, does anyone want to help? I can walk you through this thing where you can check for your breached accounts. And then I have them sit down and I say, hey, go to this site called Have I Been Pwned and punch your email address in there. And almost every single one of them is like, no, I'm not going to do that.
So like, I totally understand that reaction. I'm more wondering from Mozilla's point of view, because like, Like, Troy, you've had a conversation with him, all the controls that he has in place to be a good ethical person about this.
Yeah.
Why doesn't Firefox Monitor just give us your email address, we'll tell you, and then you just hand it to Troy and Troy tell you? Like, why isn't it just a simple facade? Why add all this hashing engineering effort to fully facilitate that?
I think it's not just coming from us, but also from Troy, in the sense that really the less that we have of this data, the better. So if we were to maintain a log, or if Troy were to maintain a log of like everyone who's scanning for all of their breached accounts anywhere, then that itself becomes a pretty valuable target, data target. So for Firefox Monitor, we don't hold on to the email addresses unless you actually subscribe. We don't keep them in our logs or anything like that, because we just don't want that data. And a lot of this data, so if you also consider from Troy's point of view, he's got some proxies between our servers and his servers. And so if we're just sending these requests over the wire, and he's got some proxies, third-party proxies between the two of us, and they're just seeing a plain text account of breached email addresses along with all of the databases that they're in, there's a whole other, vector for someone to oh, we accidentally left all of this data sitting on a log in a proxy somewhere, right? So there's a lot of, I would say, just data concern around particularly this data, because it's very sensitive. It's people's email addresses and passwords and all that kind of stuff. But also just in general, especially at Mozilla, there's a lot of, do we actually need this data? Like, do we need this data in plain text to do what we're needing to do? Like, we always ask ourselves to justify our own reasons for having data. And if we can do something in a way that we don't need data, then we do it in a way that we don't get that we don't have plain data, right? So that's probably different to a lot of other.
I was going to say, it's nice to be a good guy. It's nice to feel like a good guy at the end of the day.
Yeah. So that's coming from sort of the, I call it the lean software development and web development background of well, let's just ship it. Let's get it out there as quick as we can. Moving into the way more privacy and security conscious area of Mozilla, that was sort of, at first it was a little frustrating, because I felt like I just want to ship this thing and get it done, right? I want to get it done in the quickest way possible and the leanest way possible. And after a while, I came to really appreciate oh, wow, this feels really nice to not have to worry as much that if I make a misstep here, hundreds of thousands of people might get screwed, right? So it actually feels good once you start doing things with as minimal data as much minimal, that makes no sense. As little data as possible. It starts to feel really nice.
All right. So earlier you were talking about Firefox anti-tracking efforts and the stuff that you guys are rolling out. Can you talk more about that? I heard about fast block.
Yeah.
Can you talk about what that is?
Yeah, so it's we're basically doing some shield studies now around amping up tracking protection. So there's bugs out there for doing shield studies, which are kind of, I guess they're kind of like test pilot experiments. But a shield study tends to be less things that are very UI heavy, or very much a user needs to opt into this because they need to understand what they're about to use. A shield study, in contrast, is something where we maybe already have something built into Firefox and we just need to flip a pref value for 2 weeks and see what the effect is on Firefox usage or whatever. So we have some shield studies coming up around basically enhancing our tracking protection to do some things that are similar to what Apple is doing with intelligent tracking protection, kind of restricting third-party storage in the browser by default. And then the one fast block is basically looking at slow trackers. And if you are tracking and you're also slowing pages down, then maybe we can just stop the slow connections, right? So if you run Firefox nightly right now and you go into your preferences, you can see under privacy security, there's like a, I think it's the content blocking section. And there's now an option there that says basically block slow trackers, either like always or only in private windows, or block all trackers either in private windows or always, and stuff like that.
How do you know a tracker is slow?
So the thresholds, that's one of the things that we get to study when we do a shield study. So we'll have a shield study where we essentially have our block list available, and we will kill a tracking connection after X number of milliseconds. And we can tweak that X number of milliseconds. So for some cohort of users, we might try 500 milliseconds, and maybe for another, it'll be 1,000, and then 1,500 or 2,000 or 5,000. And we can basically try a bunch of different values for that. You know, what are we going to define as slow? And then we can do, after the shield study, we can ask users, you know, do you feel like your Firefox experience was faster, that it improved, and all that kind of stuff, and kind of balance it out with page breakages. So someone will be running this, and then if we find that they either are refreshing the page a lot, or there's just a lot of errors, like JavaScript errors that happen on the page because we do something, then we can basically have those metrics too that says, okay, now we want to find a balance between what makes all these pages load fast for whatever we're going to call fast, that we're going to find out which of these cohorts people feel like is the fastest and has the lowest amount of breakage, right? So that's what we sort of find out in these shield studies is, okay, we have this idea, and we have this vague idea of blocking slow trackers. Let's run a shield study and find out, you know, more precisely what do we mean when we say a slow tracker.
So let's flip this around to the other side. So we've been talking about the users, right, which are your priority. Let's talk about the websites and maybe even the tracking companies. What they make money. If I'm a content producing site, if I'm the New York Times, I make money based on the ads I put on the screen. And like the same cycle we had when ad blockers just first became popular is like the sites that like get their revenue from ads don't like ad blockers because then they don't get any money because their ads got blocked. And then they start blocking the ad blockers. And then you have the blockers of the ad blockers of the ad blockers, and this never ending cycle. How does this, what's the end game here, right? Because if Firefox just gets too aggressive, frankly, its market share is small enough that you could see content sites saying, sorry, you use Firefox. You can't use our site.
Yeah, and this is why we recently are very much like doing a lot of active studying in this area, because we recognize that the health of the web as an ecosystem right now is very dependent on the current state of things. And so we have to make sure that we have a measured approach, literally like measured in these shield studies, right? About how much, you know, advertising requests are we actually going to just chop off if we do this, right? Like we need a count. We need to know like what's the number here. So the stuff that I work on is primarily focused on the technical implementations. But the conversations that we have once we run these studies, those tend to start to bring in like the larger ecosystem players, right? So I don't have sort of the end game answer. Right now, I'm basically just, I guess, manufacturing arms in the arms race. and hoping
you're an arms dealer for the coming privacy wars.
Yeah, I'm like Iron Man, basically, making suits of armor for people.
So on the other side, let's say I am a content site, or I am an advertising network or something like that. And then I find out that like our agent has been marked as slow, or my site is getting like our ad revenue stripped off. Is there like recourse? Is there like, here's a place that you can contact and say, here's why it was marked as slow and here's how to improve performance, or here's why we're targeting your ads and here's some things you could do to like do something different?
So there's some of, there's a do not track standard. The one that we use, there's a W3C do not track effort for a long time. But the EFF also maintains a W3 or a do not track standard, and we actually have in our tracking protection block list domains who have voluntarily decided that they will comply with do not track. So do not track is a signal that your browser can send that says, I don't want to be tracked. And there are a handful of sites that actually look for that. And if they see that, then they serve ads in a different way. So they don't necessarily send it out to be auctioned off. What they do is kind of like serve a first-party ad or something that doesn't actually track you any further than you're looking at our page. So here's an ad, right? It's like the old school banner ads on websites, right? Where you just kind of stuck a big static image at the top of the page and hope people click on it.
Yep.
So that's a possibility. And there are, like I said,
aren't both Chrome and Firefox like just defaulting to do not track?
I don't know. I don't think that's our current default. I think there was a dust up about Edge trying to default to it or something.
Okay.
I've forgotten exactly what the history of it was. But no, so that's still built into Firefox. So, and there's a cottage industry sort of budding around non-tracking advertising. So, and I think even in Firefox, we have some of this with like Pocket integration, doing client-side ad delivery. And then there's some first-party outfits that you can use to basically say, okay, in the event that my ads get blocked, like I've got an inventory of first-party ads that are served from my own website, and these are the ads that get shown if the third-party ads don't show up, right? There's some of that now, and I love talking to a lot of those folks and reading some of their white papers, because I feel like those are the ones who are really navigating like the sticky parts of balancing the privacy aspects and the commercial interests. And so those people are kind of the ones that I feel like are going to lead the discussions that give us the end game where the ecosystem can still thrive, people still make their money, and yet users have still protected their privacy, right? So it's looking promising in those areas. A lot of people that you never would have thought were talking about it before are now talking about it. And some of that has to do with GDPR recently happening and stuff like that. So there's some back and forth between tech and policy and user concerns and all that kind of stuff that's playing out in directions where a lot more people are talking about, hey, we need to do something. Like this is a serious problem that many parties are going to have to get together to solve.
So coming back around to web developers, so one of the things that you mentioned was that there are ways that you can open up a share pop-up for Twitter or Facebook and such without needing to load the native widget from whichever site. Are there any tips that you have out, tips sort of like that for web developers to not get caught up in some of these tracking advertising utilities?
Yeah, it's really interesting story. I gave a talk about fingerprinting one time, and after the talk, someone sent me an email kind of asking for my advice on how they could build a better fingerprinter to track their own users because they had seen my talk. And I was like, I feel like maybe I failed at this talk because I was trying to say like, hey, these are bad things. And through the course of that conversation, they had as some kind of funnel, some either kind of sale or sign up funnel that they were trying to optimize, right? And so they were wanting to see how do customers go through this funnel and all this kind of usual website marketing type stuff. And through the kind of conversation talking to them, I really just sort of told them, look, here's the thing. If someone is deleting their cookies or they're using private browsing to go to your site, or they're doing these other things to try and not be tracked by you when they're on your site, like you should probably just respect the user's intention. Like if you want to do your funnel conversion metrics, do it with a regular cookie. And the users that are out there that are privacy conscious and doing cookie protections, you're not going to track them. And you probably shouldn't aggressively try to. Like you should respect your visitors and your users enough to not actively try to more aggressively track them. So that's one thing is just do the regular stuff, like do cookies. Don't track with other weird things, because most of the people that are aware and want to have their privacy as they're using the web, they use the tools that are out there, like cookie blockers and stuff. So just use regular cookies is one thing. Don't do anything aggressive or fancy just for tracking. There's also an article, I think, on Smashing Magazine. It's privacy guidelines for designing personalization. And they have kind of 3 really good concepts. And it's basically, you need to get informed consent if you're going to track people. And there's all kinds of stuff about informed consent. You need to give them a meaningful exchange for if they're giving you personal data. Like if they're giving you location data, make sure that they're giving you location data because it's relevant to what they're trying to do on your site. Like, don't just hit them with a location request the instant they land on your homepage. Wait until they're actually doing something that needs location data, right? That's another way to inform them of their consent. It's going to be more obvious to them, oh, I'm wanting to do this thing. I'm wanting to find the store locations near me. So it makes sense for can we have your location data prompt to open up then, right? And the last one that I think is really good is you need to remind users when they've given you access to certain data, like remind them later, because it actually makes them trust you more. So if 3 months down the road, they're back at your site, it would be really cool to remind them like, hey, your browser is sending us location data. Do you want to keep doing that or not, right? Like maybe you only needed it this one time 3 months ago. And every time you visit our site from now on, we've been getting your location data. Like maybe they didn't expect that. And if you do that 3 months later and actually remind them of it, then users will trust you more. Like they will say, oh, wow, you're actually being mindful about my data that you're getting. So I actually trust you more now because you reminded me. So those are some good guidelines. And then on the technical side, yeah, like when you do Facebook buttons or Twitter buttons and things like that, do them in a way that doesn't always have to send the request out to those parties. Another good thing to look at is referrer policy. If your site doesn't have a referrer policy, go ahead and add a referrer policy and make it kind of as strict and tight as possible. So that's one that a lot of people don't really consider or think about a lot. But referrers can leak a lot of people's PII, especially if you have a site that deals with people's PII. And by that, I mean like email addresses all the way up to, I think the classic example was people searching for their healthcare conditions on healthcare.gov. All of that was leaking through referrers out to a great number of third parties. So like people don't think about it, but referrers can contain a lot of PII. So maybe those are 2 quick ones: referrer policy and make your sharing buttons just use plain HTML that doesn't track people.
Awesome. I'm scared. I knew I'd be scared at the end of this. But all of this is like a really good reminder for everyone that greed is a hell of a drug sometimes, and data plays a massive part in those types of conversions.
I never want to like leave people with a scary feeling. And one of the things that made me feel like less scared and more empowered as I got into this stuff was one of the slides that was released in Snowden's documents when he released them, and it was some of the NSA programs that basically just use cookies for tracking people. And it was like, oh, if you block cookies, then you've blocked this NSA program from tracking you. So it's like, like the stuff felt really exotic when I first got into it and when I first heard about it. And then as you dig more and more into it, you realize like, this is web technology. Like I know what a cookie is. I know what an HTTP header is. Like I know what these things are. I understand these things. And there's no magic that's going on here. Like it's just HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, right? So like definitely don't be scared of it. It's especially if you're already like a web developer or a web technologist, like you're going to understand most of this stuff. You maybe have not thought about it in this way before, but don't be afraid to go read a couple things about it. and you'll realize like, oh, there's no magic here. Like there's nothing that's not like someone, like Voldemort is out there horcruxing people to track me. It's just people are using cookies. So block some cookies if you want to, right? So a lot of that can be very effective even against like really advanced and sophisticated trackers.
I think that's a pretty good message and a pretty good place to wrap this up. So as we typically kind of end our show, is we'll each kind of do a core takeaway, like what was like a big thing that we thought came out of the show. And for me, the thing that I would underline is around container tabs in Firefox. Like I said it before, I think this is like a revolutionary concept. If you haven't had a chance, you should totally go out and download the latest Firefox and install the container tab setup. It made the web run so much faster and so much more predictable for me when I'd separate out like Facebook and Twitter from work sites, from Google sites. You can't quite isolate Google, at least I couldn't, because Google kind of runs too much probably, but just about everything else I was able to isolate. So I think that's awesome. You should totally check that out. What about you, David?
I was not aware that there were like intermediaries and brokerages fighting for ads based on the cookies. I knew that there were ads that followed you around, but I wasn't aware that it was to that degree. And when browsers first started thinking about integrating some of the privacy features that Luke has with tracking in ads, I was very sort of, well, we shouldn't be prescribing this. And we as developers, not we as Mozilla, like it's our job to provide a browser. But now when I hear and get this sort of level of detail of how people can sink their hands in, how potential advertisers can, it's really scary. And oddly enough, the thing that I thought was really scary was like a year ago, I saw an article that Pornhub was getting around ad blocking by piping in advertisements through WebSockets. So like where there's a will, there's a way, but I'm glad that Firefox has people like Luke behind the scenes fighting for users and their privacy. That's really important to me. Luke, what's your big takeaway?
Probably the main thing that I closed with was I had always had kind of an inkling about I love analytics, I love data, and so I'd always kind of enjoyed analytics, using analytics and using that kind of level of user tracking on my sites to understand what they're doing. But it's in the last year or two, I think that is understandable. Your average user doesn't know about how much data they're kind of giving out. And so we as web developers especially really have a responsibility, because the rest of the web ecosystem has trained them that this is just the deal, right? You give up all of your data when you go online. And we as web developers are in a powerful seat to not take it all, right? Not take advantage of that. So we want users to trust the internet. We want users to trust the web. That means that if you're a web developer, you're sitting in a spot where you should take it pretty seriously that your users are trusting you when they visit your site, that you're not going to abuse that trust, and you're not going to take like as much data as you possibly can. So just to be mindful as a web developer that you're sitting in sort of a trusted and powerful spot.
Well, awesome. I think that's a fantastic place to end it. Anything that you'd like to plug before we wrap it up?
Oh, Firefox, always. Check out Firefox Monitor, should be coming out in a big way pretty soon, so that'll be cool. And my last plug would be my local plug for Techlahoma Foundation. Is a nonprofit here in Oklahoma that organizes meetups and conferences and tries to grow the grassroots tech community around here. So check those out.
Well, awesome. Thank you so much for being on the show. I think this was great. Firefox containers, Firefox privacy, security, all great stuff. We don't have a guest lined up for next week, I don't believe, but we will be back next week, next Thursday at 2. So be sure to subscribe to our channel and tune in. Until then, I'm Todd and my co-host,
David Walsh.
Thanks so much. See you
Adios.
next time.
Hey.